the Russia-Ukraine war, nearly completing 2 years now. But recently, just a few days ago, Russia celebrated its control over Maryinka, a town in a region in the east of Ukraine, in the Donetsk Oblast region. Now, what does it mean for Russia? Because Ukraine still claims that they're not out of the fight and they still hold their soldiers in the region who are holding the place intact. And it's not gone into Russia's control. But Vladimir Putin and Sergei Shoigu had a televised interview where they were celebrating the win over Maryinka. Now, what does it mean for Russia? And is it a trailer of things to come for Ukraine, which is still struggling to get aid to continue its fight and its resistance against Russia? To discuss matters further, we have with us Mr. Glenn Deason, Professor of International Relations, University of Southeastern Norway, who's joining us from Oslo. Mr. Deason, always a pleasure to speak to you on this.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Deason, let's start right off with this. Now, Maryinka, it's as per, I had to check up the map on this. It lies some 5 kilometers southwest of the city of Donetsk. And it's a very small region, barely has, when it was populated, it barely had like 7,000 to 10,000 people staying in the region. It's a very small place. Do you feel it's something which will be strategic for Russia going forward? Because Putin seemed to be very happy with the victory, and they did disclose it on, it was a televised interview in which Vladimir Putin and the defense minister, they were sharing their, their happiness over gaining control over the region. Putin even thanked the servicemen for winning the region over. What will it mean for Russia going forward?
Well, I think that it's a significant milestone. Not only does it give operational space for the Russians in the Donetsk area, but it has great significance. I would also add for morale, because keep in mind this has been a frontline state since 2014. That was after NATO countries toppled the government there. The new government which came in launched an anti-terrorist operation against the people of Donbass, and this became then a frontline state. So we've been fighting for this for more than 9 years, so it's quite been a long fight. So of course it's a morale booster, but also, as you point out, it's just west of Donetsk city. So again, this will put some pressure on that city because it's been shelled for 9 years. But as you alluded to, I think it's a much wider strategic significance as well, because the Ukrainian defensive line seems to be collapsing. Now that Maryinka fell, if you look to the south, you will very soon will be able to that Novomilakivka, will also soon collapse, and then that will put pressure on the strategic town of Ugledar. But also, if you look north of Maryinka, you will see Peromaiska soon collapse as well. And of course, Avdiivka will take much longer time. But across the front line, you see a large collapse. So I think this is, it's the beginning of more to come.
If you were to just track this forward, if we were to see what trajectory Russia is trying to take going forward after Maryinka, what comes next, and how does this help in their future course in terms of their direction in which they want to head?
Well, this will make it possible to push westwards much faster, because keep in mind that the initial front lines, which Maryinka represented, were reinforced and prepared for 9 years. So they were well developed, so they were difficult to break through. But if you look at the geography as well, once some of these pieces begin to fall apart, you will see more collapse on their own. So I think that this will allow Russia to finally assert proper control over the Donetsk Oblast. It pretty much almost have Lugansk, which means Donbass, the initial source of the conflict after the coup of 2014, would look like it would be more or less resolved, which could also mean that we might be moving ideally closer, of course, to a peace in negotiations at least. But I would also keep my eyes on another region further north, which would be the Bakhmut area, where the Russians are also making huge ground. So soon you'll probably start to report on the Russian offensive against Chasiv Yar. So there's a lot happening now. We seem to be hitting a breaking point in which the war is taking a different turn, where territorial changes or territorial expansion will begin to intensify.
Do you feel Russia has a point beyond which it does not want to proceed further, or taking in entire Ukraine is the eventual aim?
Well, it would never want to go into Western Ukraine because if you look at the eastern and southern parts of Ukraine, these were historically Russian lands which were transferred to Ukraine under the Soviet Union. So everything between Odessa and Kharkov, this would be the areas which Russia would be interested in for two reasons. One, if NATO's gonna start to move in on Ukraine and incorporate it, that will have two problems for Russia. One would be this territory in the east, of course, on the Russian border. In the south would be what could marginalize Russia in the Black Sea. So this is strategic territories which it doesn't want to see fall into NATO's hands. But this is also where the regions where the Russian speakers and the ethnic Russians are, which they see being marginalized and oppressed since 2014 under this government which NATO helped to install. So it has kind of two purposes. But once they cross the Dnieper River and start walking into Western Ukraine, nobody wants to see the Russians there, so they will not be welcomed by anyone. So I think you will never see them march on Lvov, for example.
So if we were to just see the way things have been moving, a lot has changed in the past 2.5 months, essentially since the Israel-Hamas war started. The entire face and the entire trajectory of the Russia-Ukraine war changed post that, if it is safe to say that. But as of now, the way we are seeing things proceed for Russia in Ukraine, do you think this is marking the end of the Russia-Ukraine conflict? We are moving towards an end of the war, which has pretty much been a war of attrition now. Who lasts longer or who lasts till the end? Is this now spelling the end of the war?
Well, I think so, because it still depends. How will the West react when the front lines begin to collapse in Ukraine? Well, they can either escalate or they can seek to de-escalate. Escalate would mean sending heavier and heavier weapons or sending NATO troops. But I think that this is starting to look like the end, because in a war of attrition, you should measure everything in territory. You should look at specific numbers, like troop levels. Russia's been increasing its troop levels. The Ukrainians are struggling to recruit more. Look at artillery. The West can't supply anymore. The Russians seem to have unlimited supply, electronic warfare, missiles, drones. In all measurable categories, you see that the Russians have a capacity to continue and at a much higher rate than the Ukrainians. All of this translates into very favorable casualty rates for the Russians, in which many more Ukrainians fall. So I'm not sure what NATO can do even now to escalate, besides getting directly involved.
So if this has to continue, NATO needs to get directly involved, which they have refrained from doing. Ever since the beginning, they have not wanted to get involved directly. For all other purposes, they have provided all kinds of weaponry to Ukraine. But now the only way to probably continue this battle would be to get involved directly, or at least until US aid starts, which does not seem very positive till now because of the kind of politics which is going on within the US. We are going to be tracking all that's happening in the Russia-Ukraine front. As of now, we're going to end the discussion here with Mr. Glenn Deason. Always a pleasure to speak with you, sir. Glenn Deason, Professor of International Relations, University of Southeastern Norway. Happy to have you here on WION, sir.
Thanks again.